Okay, what we need to look at now is actually animating the triangle asset. And if we look at the video, we can see we've got this little spark that appears until we eventually end up with the final animated, the final logo asset of the triangle for the Doritos here. Now, in order for us to do this in Photoshop, we actually have to break it into elements. So if you're using something like After Effects, we can actually animate our mask and we can get it to move and warp and dance. In this case, it's a little bit more difficult. While we can move a mask or animate a mask in Photoshop, typically it will only allow us to move in X or Y or up and down and left and right. So, we can't really change the shape of it too much, but we're going to find a hack for that. So what we're actually going to do for this is we're going to get our triangle asset here, and I've just got it here, and we're going to separate this into 3 parts. So to do that, we're going to grab our poly lasso tool, shortcut L. Make sure you're selected on the polygonal lasso tool. It's over here on the toolbar, and make sure you're selected on the triangle. I'd suggest turning off the other layers for this as we go. And don't forget to zoom in, Control plus minus to zoom out, spacebar to move around the screen, bring up the hand tool, and I'm going to just use that lasso tool, and I want to get basically this shape like this and a little bit outside but not too much, and select that. I've just made a little bit of error there. I'm going to Control D. I'm just going to make sure anti-alias is turned on. This is going to mean that we get less of a jagged appearance with our selection. Photoshop's going to try and use anti-alias algorithm to make things look a little bit softer, which is nice. And with that selected, now we're going to do a copy and paste of this. Our timelines our timeline scrubbers at the beginning. A lot of people go Command or Control C, then Command or Control V to paste, copy and paste. There is a bit of a problem with that. I'm going to do that right now. I'll show you Command C, Command V, and it's jumped. So that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure it's in exactly the same position. So shortcut for this, Command or Control J. So you can J for jump, and with that area selected on the triangle layer, Command J, and that will place a brand new layer. There it is by itself with just that selection. Now we're going to go through and do that 3 times, one for each side. Now each time we do that, you just need to make sure you reselect on your triangle layer and not leave it on the new layer, because if you do that, you're only going to get the top corner selected, which is not what you want. So if that does happen, that's basically why. So select on your triangle layer. Let's grab the lasso tool again, and I'm just going to select here. I'm only really worrying about getting this edge relatively straight here. They're going to overlap, and we're going to hide things amongst particles. So I'm trying to get that side there on the triangle. Command J. There, it's the new one. So now we've got the side. We've got this side, and I just need to get the end one. So bring my triangle back, select it on that, and lasso tool, L for lasso. Let's bring that back, and of course double click will close off that shape. I may have just missed a little bit there. I'm zooming in. If you press Shift with the lasso tool, it'll allow you to add to a selection as well. So looks like I just missed a little bit of corner there. And Command or Control J for jump. And there we have it. I've just turned the triangle off, so now we've got the end part of the triangle, that part of the triangle, that part of the triangle, which makes up the whole thing. So I can turn this previous one off completely. I'm going to rename these. So I'm just going to call them, you can call them triangle 1, triangle 2, but I'm just going to call T1. Just double click onto the naming there, T2 and T3. So as this gets more and more complex, it is important that you do get a proper naming convention. And other thing I'm going to do, Shift select all of those, right click, I'm just going to add a color to this. So orange is kind of nice and easy to recognize because that's the color of the triangle. And once again, by default, every time you create a layer, in this case it's from a duplicate, but just shrink or expand it down to your workspace. Otherwise, default's going to be 5 seconds. Great. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a mask for each of these layers, and we're going to animate that mask. So I'm going to talk a little bit about masks just on this T1 layer. If you select a marquee tool, for example, or use a lasso tool to create a shape or whatever it is, and you get the marching ants around selected on this layer, there is a mask button the bottom of your layer panel. As you can see, if you, it's a rectangle with a circle in it, and with that selected, if I press on the mask, this is just a demo, it will hide everything outside of that selection area. Now you'll also notice that there is a mask here attached to the layer. There's a little chain next to it, which means that they are linked. What this means is I can grab my move tool, and by the way, at this point I usually turn off auto select. It ends up being more hassle than it's worth. But because these are linked, I can move this around. The mask is going to move with the layer and vice versa. If I unlink this, just remember, select on the mask in this case, and I can actually move that mask around and not the layer. So it is going to be important that we do unlink these two, and you can sort of see how we might be able to animate that appearing. So I'm going to go and delete that layer mask by going on it and go delete layer mask. There we go there. The other way of using masks is we can manually paint in them as well, or we can add a gradient, or we can do all that sort of thing. So in mask world, anything that's pure white is completely visible. Anything that's pure black is completely invisible. If we go anywhere in between, say 50% grey or something like that, it's going to be a 50% transparency. The darker we get, the more invisible it's going to get. So I'm actually going to just create an empty mask for this. So I'm not going to have anything selected. I'm just going to hit the mask key. I'm going to do that with the other layers as well. I'm also aware that I'm going to be moving the mask, so I'm also going to unlink those masks from that layer. I'm going to make sure I select pure black, so I'm going to push that right to the corner of my color picker here. If you are going by numerics, remember, just get it down to 0, 0, 0, 0. Great. I'm going to use the poly lasso tool again, and what I'm going to do is create a shape, and I'm going to give it a bit of space around my first part of my triangle here. So I'm going to give it a little bit of room each side, and this is because I'm going to add a little bit of a blur to it. And if it's really close and we blur, that means the blur is going to have a semi-transparency, and it's going to reveal our triangle before we want to. But that is selected, it's on T1, great. I'm going to select on the mask. Make sure you select on the mask, not the layer. They are separate entities. Then I'm going to go to the paint bucket. Shortcut is G, which will bring up gradient, but then go down to the actual paint bucket. Make sure you select on pure black and drop that in, and that should make that invisible, but it's just going to be hidden on the mask. Control D or Command D to deselect. You can also go to select, deselect up here. Then go to the next part, and we're going to do the same. So next one, click on the mask, lasso, and let's create a shape for that. Paint bucket filled with black. Let's go to the third one, lasso. You can either hit Control D or just start drawing your lasso. Paint bucket, make sure you're on the mask, filled in, lovely. They are all unselected, very important. Now when we go to our drop down for these, we now have position, opacity, style, but we also have an animation option for the mask. We've got position for the mask, which we can move the position of it, and we've also got layer mask enable, which means we can turn the mask on or off, so we can decide whether something's going to be used or not in case of the mask. So what I'm going to do now is, with my video layer, this is the one that we're using as a reference, started, we're going to start getting that moving through, and let's start with T1. This is the first part of the triangle. I'm actually going to right click on the mask and go disable layer mask. Just going to put a little cross through there. It allows me to see the shape without the mask. And what we actually start off with a big glow effect down here behind the Doritos thing, then starts creeping up, and then when we get to a certain point, that's when that starts taking over and revealing the triangle. So I'm going to go to roughly about this point here. It's about the 8 frame mark thereabouts, and that's where I'm going to start revealing the triangle. So let's bring my mask back. You can either right click and go enable mask, or just click on it there, and let's hit mask position. So I'm going to start animating just the mask. I'm going to scrub through until we kind of reach that part where this is revealed. I'm going to grab that mask. Now you can press Command or Control T to bring up the transformation controls. This could be handy to sort of know where it is, and as you can see, that's the shape of it there. or you can just move it with your move tool. But I'm going to start shifting this around, and as I do that, you can see that's going to start revealing my shape. Now I'm going to not just stop where it's ended there, I'm just going to move it a little bit further, just to make sure it's sort of out of the way, and then press apply if you are using the transformation tool. Actually, I have made a little bit of error there. Please disregard the transformation thing. The transformation option only works if it is a smart object, and we're not dealing with a smart object, so you literally need to physically move it just with a move tool. So my little error there, that's a rookie mistake right there. So I'm going to move it back to the position where I want it to be fully revealed, grab my move tool, and I'm going to physically move that until it reveals, like so. And that will create a keyframe there. So you can see there it's revealing, boom, and then the next part goes down. So what I kind of want to do is I want to keep that motion going to the next one. I'm going to bring my timeline to the end of that point there, because that's kind of where I want to start the next part of the animation going. And as I mentioned before, this isn't going to be perfect because we are dealing with we're not really doing the best job of animating these masks that we could in After Effects, for example. So I'm selecting on the mask for T2 here. I'm going to go to layer mask position, put in a keyframe. So we've got the starting point, and we're going to scrub down until we get to the point where I want that to sort of really be affected there. Move tool, and I'm going to drag that down and until we get that as a full reveal there. So now we're going to get that, and then eventually we're going to get the other one popping through. So once again, just hold down shift, and I'm just going to lock that into where that one finishes. And let's go to T3. T3, select on the mask, animate the layer mask position, scrub it through until we get to the where we want it to be, and then let's move that mask until it moves into position like so. And what we should see is that keyframe appears, and we should at this point start seeing that reveal for that triangle. Let's see that without the background. I'm just going to create a blank layer again just as a demo. I put it in the layer group here. You can actually drag it out and move it across, but this is just to show you what's going on. Great, and let's hit the space bar, and there's our triangle forming. Let's put the text in, see what it looks like with that all forming in there. Zip, zip, zip. Not that impressive at the moment, but we are getting a bit of a reveal happening here. Alright, the next thing I want to look at is, let's turn the text back off again, is that this is kind of, it's a bit stark in the sense that we've just got a solid black line appearing, and we kind of got a bit of a pause happening here before the next one. So we might want to have a little bit of a move around for our positions. So when this one has fully appeared, then we might want to get that one starting a little bit earlier. So maybe just push the starting points for the keyframes around a little bit, so that you need to be a little bit careful because it's going to sort of thing. And the other one as well I want to mention is adding a blur to this. So we're going to add a blur to these masks as well. So I'm going to find a decent position where I can see that line, and I'm going to zoom in as well, and it's just a straight line because we're dealing with like basically a rectangle. I'm going to make sure I'm on the mask that needs to be applied, and go to filter, blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian blur. And Gaussian blur is going to allow me to actually choose how much of a blur I have. Now I don't want to overdo it because that's just going to really push it out. So I want to have a little bit of a soft edge on that. So I have a play around with that and hit OK. And you really want to test this at the beginning point, because at the beginning point, if your blur's too big, you're going to be able to see that starting point. So that's kind of why we did it a bit bigger. Cool. Let's go to the second one, and let's do the same thing. So I'm going to find a point where that starts being pushed through. Nice big chunky part if possible. And I'm going to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur again, but if you go right to the top here, it's got the last filter that we've used. So filter, Gaussian blur is up the top, and it should be the same blur, so we don't need to actually remember what the last one was. And then finally the third one, let's find a point where we can see the difference there. Filter, right at the top, Gaussian blur, and it's just added a little bit of a blur to it, so it's just going to look a little bit more effective, like so, and we get that reveal popping there. Cool, so that's the basics for creating our triangle animation, and we can go through and clean that up. We can put these in a group folder, or even convert that to a smart object, which we'll probably look at doing a little bit later. But for now, let's see what we can do for the next step.